I love Danganronpa, despite its shortcomings and tendency to fall under what can be at times ruthless criticism. I love it. I like the characters, story, humor most of the time, and music, also visuals, also designs, also gameplay, we don't count Hangman's Gambit Heavy 2, also voice acting,
that I'm lowly,
also thematic symbolism. The point is, I love Danganronpa in pretty much its entirety. I even appreciate the stuff that can come out of the controversy. However, I have a favourite character in this Wild series. You guess who they are? It's not like the title gives it away. Who else could I favour more from a controversial series than the most controversial character? Enter Nagito Komaeda. By the way, I'm an English dub person. Nagito Komaeda is truly one of the most Danganronpa characters of all time, being from objectively the best entry in the franchise, to running the best case better than Karumi running to escape the 53rd killing game, to being the main antagonist and temporary protagonist of Danganronpa 2. Is it that difficult to understand why I love him? He technically made everybody blackened in the only half-baked climactic reenactment to ever exist.
The person who actually arranged this incident was the victim, Nagito Komaeda.
Powerful. But although he's powerful, that power clearly has its limits. In Danganronpa 3, which is already disliked, it, although low-key, changes Nagito as a character. His personality, design, voice acting, and even treatment is completely different when compared to Danganronpa 2, and to an extent, even another episode. In this video, I'd like to go in depth to this rapid-fire load of Monokuma change room, minigun bullets, points, and get to the bottom of this mystery that nobody was wondering about in the first place. I doubt anybody even knew. Maybe I'm wrong, but who knows? In Danganronpa 2, as previously stated, Nagito is considered the main antagonist from a functional standpoint.
Think, somewhere deep in my heart, I was probably hoping to find someone who would stop my evil deeds.
The narrative antagonist is debatable. Is it Hajime, Izuru, Junko, the Future Foundation? You could debate for hours, but objectively, Nagito serves the same role that Kokichi and Byakuya serve in their respective games, that of an antagonist in the class trials, and to an extent, normal interaction between the students. Similar to Kokichi, he's a complete social reject, though differently, it isn't intentional. Nagito's role as a reject causes him to be both threatening and mysterious to the protagonist of the game, Hajime. Sad he might have a great crush on him. You never quite understand his thought process, and the game clearly doesn't try to change that. You only get glimpses of his normalcy, especially in the prologue and chapter 1, but it never justifies or sheds light on his main trope of insanity. Honestly, I quite like that. It's not like they fully ignore any attempt at humanizing him either, as they clearly try to convey some sort of unexpected pain from his death in chapter 5, and in the end, he's just a student like the rest of the class. Take his free time events, for example. Though the game knows where to draw the line, you never feel close to him at all, even when playing as him in chapter 4. Monomi legitimately states she is afraid of him. And most players would agree in that moment. In Danganronpa Another Episode, the same applies, sorta. The statement of mysterious outcast still applies, but no real humanization. Nagito is, in a way, the mastermind of parts of the game. He throws Kamaru into the adventure of a lifetime to create the greatest hope he can, ultimately being screwed over in the end. And even with his clear shift into a superior dynamic, he's belittled by those around him more and more over the course of the game.
Hey! No talking without the leader's permission! You're just a servant. Next time you talk without getting the okay from me, I'm gluing your mouth shut!
That is quite a scary thought.
Whether it's by the antagonists or protagonists, it isn't in his interest nor right to resist, because according to him,
I've made peace with the fact that I'm a lowly, stupid, insignificant human who can't do anything right.
notice the extremities in what he does for Hope compared to Danganronpa 2? It's probably Junko's brainwashing. So, he's pretty much a part of the games rather than a character majority of the time. Whether it's organising hacker gun upgrades, literally doing the climactic reenactment for you,
Normally, we'd end up listening to Hajime lecture us with a very long summary of the case. But there's no reason to waste any more time on this opening act, so I'm going to end this right now.
First of all, I'm messing with all the plots of building. Kind of tried to lure only Nekomaru. The elevator was probably broken by that point. Thanks to that, Nekomaru wasn't able to go to Brick Town, which was supposed to be the meetup point, so we tried going over to Strawberry Town, just like we did when we found out the elevator was broken. Well, it's obvious he attacked that. At that time, we didn't know the two towers were the exact same place. Also, the button in Strawberry Hall was broken, so he was easily able to enter Strawberry Tower. But surprise! None of them was waiting for Nekomaru's arrival. Their plan was a balancing act of uncertainties. But even if they failed, they probably wouldn't have minded. They can just read everyone the next morning as if nothing happened, and come up with a different plan.
I'm going to continue summarizing the case, okay?
Through this, Gundam successfully lured Nekomaru to Strawberry Tower. There's no way he could fight head-on with robotic Nekomaru, so by pressing the Ignite button, he rendered Nekomaru powerless without fighting.
What's wrong with that?
being the motive for a chapter.
Right?
Causing a murder, he pushes the story forward. It's as if he was made not to be entirely human, but rather a narrative device, though it's debatable if that's good or not. I personally like the fact they turned a narrative device into a character but also doing it in reverse. Makes it believable and 3D. That last statement might confuse you, but let me explain. They balanced out the visible intention behind creation and decisions with Nagito. Was he made to be a character or plot device? And what did he truly become in the end? You never get close enough to the character to understand the intentions behind his writing, causing him to feel very real. He's somebody you'll never really know. He is an antagonist after all. Of course, the rich guy from the first game has the opposite approach when coming to the end of the first game, and that's fun too. I love money. Let's talk about the first 3 episodes of Danganronpa 3, and I'll focus on 4 afterwards. As Nagito says,
Hey, my bad. Kinda turned it up to 11 there for a minute.
Nagito was painted as a normal student, like in Chapter 1 of the first game, though it's like they took the iconic parts of him and bloated them a little. He rants far more frequently.
This homeroom and its light will endure triumphant for the rest of forever.
He brings up Hope constantly and is always talking about his luck. In the games he did this, but only in moments of psychosis, otherwise it was very light. I find it hard to believe Nagito would cry over an amazing meal entitled A Fragment of Hope.
Because I found it after all these years of searching. A fragment of hope!
I imagine him more as him smiling with wide eyes, simply commenting on its quality with passionate expression. It's unsettling but not completely derailing. I also see Nagito taking control over the situation, similar to Chiaki, once his classmates underwent their weird lust scene. However, I've been listing examples instead of really explaining. I sound more confused than Gonto right now. Nagito is fan service, just like Mikan, just like Chiaki. They make him feel far too personal and close to the viewer to make him feel like a distant threat amongst your classmates. While he's just still among your classmates, he's just misguided and judged unjustly, rather than what the hell is wrong with this murderer? It's like what made him inhumane has now become normal because it's Danganronpa. I've seen people say Danganronpa 2, which has the least grounded setting and cast, has the most grounded writing, I could say. The students act in an indisputably realistic way in reaction to the Killing Game and Nagito, for example. Nagito hardly even laughs psychotically in the anime, I think. Where's my boy Bryce going insane? He just isn't a complex character. He's been reduced to a blank slate, and this is info from the first 3 episodes and only justify his shifting to more of a tritagonist than an antagonist. He isn't antagonistic in the majority of the anime, but there are a few examples. And one is entirety of episode 4. This to me is the Nagito episode of the Despair arc. This episode follows Nagito plotting to explode the gym of Hope's Peak solely to delay the exams. This is in true Nagito fashion and I love it, but what makes this a Danganronpa 3 moment is, as per usual, their attempt to get you to sympathize with him. Afterwards, it's revealed that Nagito delayed those exams so his classmates could have more preparation time. It's told to them by their teacher, Chisa, after she pretty much babysits Nagito. This just doesn't feel very Nagito, and maybe even very Danganronpa. These things are almost always implied, and they aren't put there to justify actions, only to understand them a little more. With this, it's brought up in a way where it's saying, hey, Nagito is a good person because he ruined multiple people's lives and blew up a chunk of his school for the sake of his classmates that struggle to take care of themselves. Don't get me wrong, I love the class and of course Nagito, but it just doesn't feel very Nagito. He's displayed as crazy but with human intentions like they're romanticizing it. Though in the game it's far more convoluted, like the character. Also, have you noticed how calm he is in the anime? He can explode the school and calmly shrug in response, yet in game he psychotically laughs and rants on and on about hope. That is Nagito. In the anime, he's a calm, collected and over-justified criminal, yet in the game he's completely off the rails, which just fits him so much better. Did whoever make this absolutely bonkers decision want Nagito to appear as a calm, collected criminal? I mean, he can be in both mediums, but once Taupe enters the picture or even other things, he breaks. You'd expect this from him in the anime, when he's surrounded by ultimates that can, quote-unquote, generate so much hope. How bright can it shine before it fades? Now, you may be wondering why I'm defending game Nagito more than anime Nagito, and I guess that's worth explaining now. I'll start this off with a bold statement that'll summarize the point I'm trying to make for the section. Danganronpa 2 Nagito is the authentic one. Danganronpa 3 Nagito, he's a shell of his former self. Consider this an intermission to the actual second point. It's relevant enough though. At least more relevant than Hifumi will ever be. As easy as it would be to say Danganronpa 2 released earlier than Danganronpa 3, this is a video essay. Video essays are long. Let's look in depth, shall we? Us Danganronpa fans crave content. When Danganronpa 2 released, effectively everything was free from influence. The only things I can imagine had expectations were overall quality, Byakuya, and the returning cast of characters at the end. Also the humour. Man. There's a reason they brought back the 3 most relevant survivors from Danganronpa 1 after all. They didn't have expectations for the new and fresh characters to crush the writers or influence their choices. Fan service exists, and that's my point. In Danganronpa 2, Nagito was the most raw version of himself. He wasn't the most popular Danganronpa character or most controversial. He was just an idea, and one that was planned to be hated, according to supposed words from Kazutaka Kodaka. You can see this bleed through the writing of Danganronpa 2, and it's not like there's a reason to hide it in the first place. I explained this earlier, so I'll make it short, but it's important to remember he's an antagonist and a natural disaster of sorts, though primarily from a distance. He wasn't supposed to be as likeable as he became in the end, which is surprising such a cool character wasn't even intentionally cool. And like usual, the opposite applies to its sequel, Danganronpa 3. A lot of influence had grown by this point though. I guess this wasn't a surprise at the time, since there's a missing piece of the puzzle. Danganronpa, another episode. In this game, Nagito had existed for 2 years already, so they had expectations to live up to. They needed him to be Nagito, and not gonna lie, they did a pretty solid job. As a Nagito fanboy myself, he's different in very minor ways, such as being significantly less dramatic when it comes to his own shortcomings. While there are sprites in Danganronpa 2 for Nagito showing disappointment, defeat and disgust, the version in Ultra Despair Girls doesn't really show these emotions. I have reasons for those differences, but that information is for later of course. They nailed it with how they brought back the beloved character. Back to the main point, Danganronpa 3. Some see this version of Nagito as an improvement, some don't. Some don't even realise they're different, but it's clear for me at least. The Nagito in this version is far more humour based, which does fit the anime medium a lot more, as goes with a lot of the characters, though I think Danganronpa 2 was the most anime-like of the games, and would have recreated that energy with ease. There's a reason they didn't. Nagito's iconic parts shine just like the hope he cradles so dearly every night far more than his 3D personality in the games, because why should they? He's a poster child for the franchise and doesn't need to be kept complicated clearly. For entertainment alone, this version excelled with it. There was influence and reason to emphasise on certain parts of his character and give him a closer role in the story, as it was the next step in growing his popularity and making some profits. Though I've never seen Spike Chunsoft as particularly money hungry or anything along these lines, I think they're reasonable with their motivations, most of the time. So, to summarise, the strike of Nagito's popularity struck a chord with mostly the audience, but also Kazutaka Kodaka, causing him to prioritise the likeable parts of the character rather than the hated. And that's the biggest thing. Danganronpa tried to make Nagito hated, and Danganronpa 3 tried to make him loved. It's a fire quote. Summarises everything pretty much. However, what isn't summarised or somehow even mentioned yet is his voice acting.
Seriously, that's all just coincidence.
Remember, I'm an English dub watcher. I might do my homework though.
Danganronpa.
Is that name confusing? I hope so. I had next to no ideas, so, it's sorta justified. As just stated, I want to discuss his voice acting. This might sound completely BS, but it's actually relevant. Sure, Hajime's voice acting also changed, but
Same thing as everyone else, I guess? I've had my sights on Hope's Peak ever since I was a little kid.
we aren't talking about that. We're discussing Nagito. His voice has rasp to it.
Byakuya performed admirably. Me? Lie? That's outrageous. There's no way someone like me could ever lie to you guys.
Both in English and Japanese dubs if you weren't aware, and I appreciate the consistency, especially when both voices cover different parts of his personality, interestingly enough as it is.
I can't stand this anymore. I don't want to do this to my friends. We're all friends, aren't we? There's no way one friend would murder another. But with a twist ending like this, I think we can all agree this ended up being a very interesting mystery.
These different parts of the English dub giving a more gentle, laid-back, but somewhat malicious vibe.
It was probably wrapped there by the killer to keep us as far from Strawberry Tower as possible.
Whilst the Japanese counterpart has a more innocent and well-intended tone to it.
最高だね。終わりの始まりにふさわしい花火だよ。
However, as shocking as it is, even both versions of his voice acting change. In Danganronpa 2, both in the English and Japanese dubs, his voice is more raspy than other versions.
To be honest, I'm also... No, everyone else feels the same too.
それは僕も。他のみんなだって一緒だよ。
Albeit not all the time in the case of the Japanese dub. However, in the English one, his voice is more condescending in Danganronpa 2. Though it's more of a whisper or just overall more soft than both Ultra Despair Girls and Danganronpa 3.
You're elites. You've been praised your whole life for being the best. But you can't hope to defeat them.
Hey, can you hear me? Are you okay? Hey, can you hear me? Are you okay?
His voice actors remain the same, yet do their jobs differently. I'd just call it inconsistency, but it is consistent, just in another episode and 3. While I'm bringing up his stylistic changes, it's worth mentioning his design. His clothing in Danganronpa 2 and another episode are both very drained and sad, albeit a little more colourful in Danganronpa 2. It's undeniable how drained they are though, as a dark red and hardly green shade of green is used. His pants are plain black, his hair is awfully drained of unique colour. However, in Danganronpa 3, he wears a brown uniform which should theoretically feel less colourful, but it does the opposing job. Paired with the lighting of his hair causes him to feel very bright. What has always stuck out and even bothered me is his hair though. First off, Nagito post-dream and pre-dream have totally different hair. Post-dream actually does a good job at replicating the game design, but it lacks fluff in the upper areas. In the game, it's more fluffy and covers his forehead, though I gotta admit they cover it more post-dream, while it feels more thin in the anime. He's more broad in build too. While you could argue this is because it's an anime style, that's false. Ultra Despair Girls captures Nagito's game design both in anime and even in 3D, to an extent. It's possible for Nagito to look more like his sinister self in a cartoon environment, which makes me feel a little bit confused. Even his design gives a different vibe. More gentle and strong, while in the game he was physically skinnier and represented his mental fortitude and analytical skills, though physically weaker. You don't see much of that in the anime, and even if there's less places to those moments, the physical design is more of a nudge towards difference. However, I mostly noticed the hair. Otherwise it's pretty much the same, just stylistic differences. It is of course Extreme and Ultra Despair Girls, but his physical elements are effectively identical, though the voice acting changes a lot in how the character is conveyed, and was actually what began my idea for this video. Also, his body language is way different. The 2D images of sprites that he has, and even his animation in UDG, is far more expressive than in the anime. Don't at me saying that it's hard to do, because Genocide Jack is off the rails in both UDG and Danganronpa the animation. He's too calm in the anime both in character and now body language. It only becomes clearer what differences there are and why. I mentioned Nagito was fanservice 2 or 3 times. I also mentioned that he was amplified for his iconic moments, though a little bit of a contradiction happens. I want to give credit to what the writers did right in terms of authenticity. Nagito disappears from the story as a whole in episodes 5 and 6, focusing more on Ryota, Junko, and Chiaki. Izuru appears toward the end of the 2 episodes as well. It's clear they removed Nagito from the story because they were advancing the plot to the extreme in such a small amount of time, and didn't take much action on it beforehand. Ironically, Nagito kickstarts this in a way, which I like. He sets the tone for the next 8 episodes, however, there's a flaw in this positive. The writing of the overall show is negatively portrayed due to this decision, as they needed to write out a character just to further the story because of their ignorance in the earlier episodes. They were focused on the fun, cuddly anime, and while I appreciate the sentiment of subverting expectations, they made Nagito the embodiment of that too. Too much so, as he doesn't even act the way he does in the prologue of Danganronpa 2. Different to an extent. However, Nagito does return, and this is when he has the shift that began in episode 4. This shift is to a more accurate depiction of our favourite Hope Bagel. Before I continue, I want to remind you that I've grown to love Danganronpa 3, at least the Despair arc so far. I love the character writing, outside of Chiaki being praised.
Not to touch your classmate? He's in our class too, though, so it sort of muddied the moral. In moments of darkest peril, I've always been able to count on the heavens.
And the brainwashing, and the ultimate imposter's reveal. And everything I'm saying is more bringing it up, rather than negatively or positively connoting the topic or source material. Let's continue now, shall we? So, back to this shift in character. Nagito grows far more despairful as the show does as well, which I somewhat like, but 2 things clearly bleed through. His absence and return are clear narrative devices, literally returning as the class is investigating Mikan's disappearance.
Yeah, sorry. Still a dude. It's been a while. I brought gifts.
His luck causes them to find Junko's hideout. Nagito brings up the class's reluctance to help Chisa after she had said to help them.
You're elites. You've been praised your whole life for being the best. But you can't hope to defeat them. Understand, I'm only telling you this for your own good. You saw what they could do, Nanami. You know that I'm right. We're all super high school level at something. Maybe it means you have talent to burn, but you have to know when to cut your losses.
She leaves the story once it needs to focus on other characters after all. Now, you may be tempted to hastily type in the comments saying, but you said Nagito was good as less of a character and more of a narrative device. And you'd be right. However, I said with a balance as well. The type of balance I described where he feels like a character but feels like a force of nature. Especially in retrospect. However, in the anime it's completely different. He only feels like one or the other. Sure, you might not think so in the moment, but it becomes clear how once you get to reflecting on it. It isn't even explained what Nagito did while he left or why exactly he came back. His first few sentences already mention where Mikan is and kickstart the rest of the story. He is an obvious narrative device. They don't attempt to give him much flair besides that. I will admit it feels more like Nagito than the first half of the anime season, but only because it's lacking in the less authentic side of him. It's still lacking, If Nagito truly despised Junko in that scene in the hideout, he wouldn't rant about himself.
See, I'm that kind of guy.
He'd only rant about hope, or nothing at all. It feels like he's trying to impress his higher-ups rather than to scold or finish off Junko. He just acts so off occasionally, and it irritates me. However, giving credit where credit's due, his line,
I'm not really sure what you're supposed to say about all this. I guess, happy graduation.
is pretty Nagito, alongside his testing of his students in their time of need. I just feel as if he's a little too directly kind rather than obscured to reflect his mental state in some of these moments. Going back to the beginning of the video, he's too humanized and too soft. He does not seem like he'd sacrifice his classmates for hope, and that just isn't him. Though I'll always think the voice acting is a big chunk of the reason for this, he's so much more passionate and has a more significant attitude in Danganronpa 2 through his voice alone.
In the end, hope always wins. That's what I believe.
Now, I've been discussing the difference and the behind the scenes reasoning for it specifically, so I want to change my approach. Then, if I'm wrong on one angle, I can just fall to the other. Let's talk about canon reasoning for his multiple shifts in character. I've been tempted to bring this up more than a few times, but structure is important. I want to discuss Nagito's changes in relation to his circumstances and surroundings. It's also important to consider how much he's been through and how much he remembers and knows when these different types of him pop up. Instead of the first release, I'd like the start of the first chronological release. Of course, technically, his character in the prologue of Danganronpa 2 is the oldest and earliest of the bunch, but shut up, if this actually went through your mind. I want to start in Danganronpa 3, which very accurately depicts a reflection of the environment in respected character, sorta. As I said previously, Nagito grows more unhinged as the show becomes unhinged. I'm sure knowledge of the protests and Junko and Ashima caused his character to shift somewhat, as he would have had to resort to more desperate circumstances, and that he did. Though I find it difficult to believe he was tricked by Junko when he can so effectively figure out murder cases.
The only place I can think of is the Octagon.
In a far less mentally developed version of himself. Maybe that vacation with the shower scene was too comfy for him and he slacked off. In all seriousness though, his soft side is probably letting his guard down as he's surrounded by ultimates in a passive and peaceful classroom. Playing video games, eating ultimate foods, and most importantly, lusting over hope. Okay, so yeah, Nagito was happy. Albeit slightly misunderstood. It's not as bad as being tied up because you're a threat to people's lives. I believe he would set off bombs and make life suck even at the expense of other ultimates for his classmates. Not because they're close, even if it's painted that way, but because they're 14 or 15 ultimates that can create hope. They're described as the most hopeful class there is, and even though it's complete cap because Nagito was in it, I'm sorry baby girl, and Makoto exists in a different class. It's all Chiaki, man, but I'll get to that at some point soon, can't rush it. I want to bring up his behaviour in the second half. This isn't a problem in the anime, just the writing itself. But why the hell does Nagito love the hope that could come from Junko, but then go try to kill all the remnants of despair? Is it because he's already creating that hope? Is he only condescending to Hajime? Did he know about Izuru? I'm so lost. Am I forgetting something? I don't know anymore. But I think Nagito was too tame in that run-in with Junko, and even afterwards. He should be balls on the wall insane over meeting the ultimate despair and ultimate hope. But instead he's either acting like he's on the same level, or lying down having a wet dream about Izuru. That ain't it, Chief. I guess he could have been acting this way because he was written properly this time, interacting with Junko the same way he interacts with the remnants of despair in Danganronpa 2.
What are you doing? Tiny up. I'm not sure. You guys are really disappointing. How long are you going to continue behaving so short-sightedly? You gotta look at the big picture, you know? It's fine if you don't understand. You just see the end without knowing.
Even though this isn't really a canon thing, I had to bring it up now. His writing when becoming a remnant was pretty good too. He laughed. He actually laughed. Finally! Now let's talk about Danganronpa 2. I'll try to make this short and sweet because the source material is longer than the script. The script is actually not that colossal in comparison, but you get my point. In Danganronpa 2, desperation is the trend. Nagito is twistedly happy and upbeat, even being said here. Yet he has his moments. I want to reiterate, in this game he is balanced between happy and upbeat.
You guys only think there's something wrong with me because there's something wrong with you.
And borderline insane.
Cut to the chase. You're correct. It was my doing all along.
Danganronpa 3 only focuses on one at a time or crosses them over in a different way. I'm sure Nagito always crosses over in the game because he's literally in a killing game. He's saying people can kill him for hope.
Amazing.
And all he's really trying to do is exploit the situation for as much hope as he can get, which he's always doing. I just think the anime lacks this, and an inconsistency is its lack of self-sacrifice and upbeat nature in the second half of the anime, even though they're similar circumstances. If you ignore that though, the canon sorta makes sense. He grew distasteful of the reserve corps student Hajime in chapter 4. And I don't think we see enough of his opinion on talentless nobodies in the anime. Izuru takes the cake for those rants, usually.
People without talent are parasites. Ticks. Mindlessly gorging themselves on the blood of larger creatures. They pair off and reproduce. That's it.
And he doesn't even talk much in general.
It's really you!
I will say something that goes against a lot of what I've said. Nagito's free time events, at least in the early game, are kinda accurate to his Danganronpa 3 depiction. Emphasis on the word kinda though. He's still better balanced in his chapter 3 and 4 events than in Dangan 3. And of course he'd be a bit more unhinged. Somebody is talking to him in extremely isolated and despairful circumstances. He even touches on the cycle of luck. Okay, I think you get the point when it comes to Danganronpa 2. Time for Ultra Despair Girls. Nagito is effectively the same as the other game. Self-sacrificial, unhinged, but calm simultaneously. He has the eerie effect and same role as I've said. There isn't much to touch on in terms of difference, and he doesn't even react to his unlucky interaction with Toko. He knows the cycle will commence, which there's a lack of in the anime. However, he is more extreme as I've said once or twice. He is far more willing to expose himself and others for despair, having far more faith in his ability to turn around. This is most likely because of the brainwashing and his role as ultimate despair. This is definitely canon rather than inconsistent, hence why I didn't mention it previously. He acts this way in chapter 0 of Danganronpa 2 as well. I think this makes another episode the opposite to Danganronpa 3 from a canonical standpoint, while it's a different standpoint officially. If we're talking canon, there is reasoning for his change, but clearly a lot of inconsistencies in some builds too. Now, there is one topic I haven't touched on at all yet, besides in one small comment about his differing appearance post-game, and that is the 2 extra episodes. It's important to bring up his opposite self and representation of his Danganronpa 2 self in the Danganronpa 3 anime medium. Does it hold up? Let's start with the post-game hope arc and the ending of Danganronpa 2.5. Trust me, the names have meaning. This bullet of hope is the representation I'm about to go into, while the chamber of despair is the rest of the anime. Please don't flame me. Okay, ignoring the main course of Danganronpa 2.5, it's surprisingly accurate and true to character. Of course, there isn't much to criticize, but it's good to have some positivity in what is largely a more negatively toned video. I'd like to talk about stuff I like. He killed tens of possibly hundreds of people by stepping on a pebble. A pebble! And then simply explain, "Good to be back," while doing his iconic waving pose. That is so Nagito. He literally appreciates the beauty in things, acts happy, and does something that would typically be off the rails. He makes something crazy feel normal, which is what he's good at, not being dramatic in a dramatic moment unless there's some hope flair to it. On top of this, when welcoming Ryota to the group, he mentions his shining talent as the reason for wanting him aboard.
I've always admired that shining talent of yours. Our team could use a guy like you.
Nothing else is implied besides that. While his voice acting remains inconsistent, he gets close to sounding like the real Nagito at the end of the Hope arc when he calls out for Hajime.
Better move if you expect there to be any food left.
As enthusiastic as always, truly enjoying himself. On the OVA side of things, Nagito shows a distaste for his dream of being the opposite of himself.
よかった。もし本当にみんなが幸せに暮らしていけるのなら、才能なんてなくてもいいだなんて。僕らしくないからさ。
While in a lot of ways, in an authentic way as well. He then passes up the opportunity to be extremely close to his classmates, showing them fade away to a rant about how he chooses hope. That is the embodiment of Nagito. It isn't played off as him disguising his love for his classmates through a visor of hope. It's just that, his love for hope. Nothing that tries to make him easy to sympathize with or too human. It is raw Nagito. Though, one thing that irritates me a little bit is he complains so severely about his dream that he actually cares about his privacy and hopes that nobody saw it, and then proceeds to say this absolute banger of a line.
何しやがる。まあ、悪い夢じゃなかったよ。
In the same basket though, I like how he gives his affection to Kazuichi and Fuyuhiko, even though you could say I've been complaining about that human side of him for this whole video. Something is just sort of satisfying after watching the OVA. It's not like he forgot about the dream, and speaking of that dream, it's time to talk about it. After the events of Danganronpa 2, pretty much any character you ever loved probably died. Chiaki, Nagito, Ibuki, Gundam. Anyway, let's continue. These characters were stated in a simulation, and that means they actually didn't die. Shocking turn of events, I know. However, their brains thought so. Nagito contradicted the law of this, and same as the other characters, went into a coma. He dreams in his coma about an opposing version of himself, in a world where he actually has friends, and his friends don't have talents.
機械いじりが得意なだけのただのガキだし、考えてみたら全然釣り合わねえだろ。
It's really unclear and vague what the rules of this world are, if you can even call it a world. Even though Nagito is crazy, this world is crazier. I like the episode, but from an objective standpoint, it makes almost no sense when you think about it for more than 5 seconds. The amount of change in Nagito's character goes through in this episode is unclear. He has no talent, is unlucky, has friends without talent, and might go to the reserve course? It's, as I said, unclear. Even though so much of his character is different, including his love for hope, he still rants, this time on talent.
ああ、才能なんてなければいいのに。あ？だってさ、ソニアさんが普通の女の子だったら、ソーダ君だってあんなことで悩まずに済んだわけだし。僕はね、才能が憎いんだ。
I find it really bizarre that so much of him is opposed, yet he still has the same personality. I understand it's probably intentional, but at least draw the line in his differences. Does he see Kazuichi and Fuyuhiko as close friends in reality, or is it just the dream speaking? Overall, there's a significant lack of what is what. On top of this, there's something I think goes further than just unexplained, and that is his behaviour. Although he usually has the same personality, even that is inconsistent. The fact he has friends should show that enough, but consider his behaviour in this scene. Do you see the problem? He acts like he isn't completely mental, and sure, he might not be, but then what's with his ranting and psychotic moments? Also, I find it interesting that he looks identical to his Despair Arc design. I think there's intention behind this, considering that another episode and Hope Arc have Nagito appearing differently in the animated medium, yet the design in Despair Arc and the Nagito OVA are identical. Hear me out. It's pretty obvious that it's meant to be identical, since they both go to school and oddly enough have a similar demeanour. I think this OVA shows the flaws with Despair Arc Nagito on the forefront as he's now the main character. You get a very deep look into who he is, and even when he's cornering Fuyuhiko on the road, Nagito never feels distant. Maybe that's intentional, but it highlights the problems with Despair Arc. The main difference is his concern for his friends and the lack of knowledge towards his situation. When he's in the building with alter ego Izuru, or he's on the phone, he seems scared and confused. You almost never see this from Nagito, and I don't know if it feels like part of his set character. Of course, I don't want to gatekeep though. Anyway, you see this in Despair Arc with episode 4, in which he had caused havoc for his friends instead of causing havoc for Hope, showcasing his unrealistic care for his classmates, and the gun scene with Junko, which I love using as proof of my claims. Although there is a clear difference in Nagito's behaviour in both his confrontation with Junko and his confrontation with quote-unquote Izuru, he's far more confident in his ability in reality, and I guess that sums up the difference in similarities here. Nagito is more complicated in having a superiority complex and inferiority complex.
Nobody's ever complimented me on my appearance before. Not even my own mother.
Simultaneously in the Despair Arc, whilst in the OVA, he only has an inferiority one. This makes sense due to his circumstance of having bad luck and stuff, but he also has a support group now. It just doesn't sit right with me how Nagito was depicted in this episode. When I think about it for 10 minutes, he's so complicated. I want to note that I'm definitely thinking too much into this, and I'm sure they just wanted to make Nagito himself enough to get attention and positive reception, and continue to be known as the opposite of himself. It's only like 23 minutes, yet so many words were written. I want to discuss now another game. Danganronpa V3. Another episode in Danganronpa 2 aren't the only games after all. We've got one more game to cover. He's in the ending. Wait, I meant Danganronpa S. He's got 20 or so minutes worth of content and character, which is around the same as the OVA. If that gets 700 words spoken about it, this can receive some love too. Future me here. It's a lot of love. Holy crap. These scenes are disconnected from each other, and honestly pretty shallow. However, regardless of those straight facts, any Nagito content is relevant content, and for him to have dialogue that is even remotely relevant to him, there needs to be character writing. Because there's such a small batch of honestly small scenes, I'll structure it in said scenes. Here we go! Nagito has an albeit small introduction scene. That's if you can call it that, considering it's a single line of dialogue. But who cares, I guess. Nagito says the lines, which is fitting for his character and works as an introduction for a few reasons. Here are those reasons. He has his iconic waving position, which is welcoming, friendly, and optimistic, a mood that he almost always embodies whenever not provoked with what he would consider despair, and that's accurate to his current situation. There's also his use of the concept of hope. It isn't used in a form that immediately kicks him off as mental, same as a lot of the other scenes in the game. As it is an introduction to what seems to be a relatively relaxing game, it has countless parallels to its Danganronpa 2 counterpart. His position as previously mentioned, personality, and even the setting. It works well. The next scene on my list follows Mikan complaining about Monika's absence and the constant avoidance from her to Nagito. He follows a very calm and possibly even serious attitude in the situation, instead of going off and apologizing when Mikan accuses Nagito of hurting her feelings, or Nagito going on about hope or despair. I don't think this is inaccurate per se, but nudges towards the context of the summer camp. He's hiding his off-the-rails side of his personality, similar to the prologue in Chapter 1 of Danganronpa 2. And I think this efficiently lends itself as a pathway between Danganronpa 3 and the Danganronpa games. He does have a slight moment towards the end where he does come to Mikan's emotional aid, and it's what seals the deal for me that this is Nagito's intention. As well as this scene, Angie and Nagito also interact. I see it as simple Nagito self-loathing fan service, but I'll explain why. He has a small rant about talent and how Angie outshines him completely, alongside saying it causes him to appreciate it further. He receives a sacrificial offer and questions it with visible reason, being that he might not be good enough to sacrifice. He also compliments Atua, but makes two small remarks towards the end. I also like this scene as it shows Nagito isn't awkward or freaked out by the sacrifices, the mentioning of Atua, or Angie's clear lack of empathy towards his comments. He simply welcomes the colourful character, praising her talents, complimenting her ideology, and being hard on himself simultaneously. He isn't awkward pretty much. He's as open to new things as he always is, and embraces it. He shows genuine curiosity as well, and I think this scene showcases a lot more of his honest character compared to the previous. The next up is Hiro, Rantaro, and Nagito. The one I might misunderstand a little, but from what I'm getting, Rantaro and Hiro are discussing a business idea that happens to require somebody that's lucky, which results in them relying on Nagito for this idea. He seems worried, and I'm sure that's due to his lack of confidence in his ability. As they continue discussing, Nagito objects, saying that they might be disappointed. This is where it gets a little cloudy, and I'm hoping it's intentional. If it is, it's Nagito being complicated like intended and making things deep and difficult to understand. And that's cool in my opinion. The reason why I find this scenario complicated is due to the fact that Nagito is either reading too deep into the situation and bringing up irrelevant, non-fitting concerns, or lacking far too much trust in himself. Both of these conclusions amplify the complications of each other, yet fit Nagito's mindset. Maybe I'm the one reading too deep into this. Regardless, it causes Hiro to decide against his original business idea. Overall, it's a good scene for his character. He shows all emotions he typically shows, and even has a Nagito moment with his iconic laughing sprite, praising Rantaro for pushing forward in life. In the end, he states that deciding against the idea was a bummer, but that he didn't want to push it and didn't want to cause friction between the two. Perfect ending for a character who loves stating things but lacks the desire for a negative outcome. The interaction between Nagito and Kazuichi is effectively a love letter the fans of Danganronpa to me, and it attempts to replicate the personality displayed in the game. In this scene, Nagito seemingly acts like himself, praising Kazuichi for his talents and talking about hope. I won't get into specifics, but it creeps out Kaz, like in the original game. Nagito has no resolve and ultimately falls back in trying to understand Kaz, which doesn't exactly understand Nagito either. He's willing to make sacrifices and compromises for the ultimates around him, because, as Kaz says, maybe... There is something interesting introduced, however. Nagito disliking Hajime's reserve course origins is touched on here, interestingly enough. While this isn't new, the way he behaves is. Immediately after using his arrogant, condescending sprite that most of us grow familiar with over the course of Chapter 4, he does his most friendly sprite, calling him a friend. It's possible the difference here originates from a circumstantial difference, being in a summer camp where they try to get along and have fun. Also, there's no remnants of despair to only amplify his negative attitude. Overall, it's interesting, and while I thought it could be to boost Kaz's mood, Nagito hates despair more than he loves hope, I believe. In fact, is that another difference between the anime and the game? In Danganronpa 2, Nagito loses himself in hating despair for a chunk of chapters 4 and 5, and although he acts normal and formal occasionally, it's far more obvious than when he loves hope. He was at least able to hide his passion in that regard, but not this one. I agree with Nagito feeling a strong bond with Hajime, but upon learning of his lack of talent, that despair immediately takes over his priorities. This is less true in another episode, as he's willing to go through more despair for more hope, being more extreme. In Danganronpa 3, when met with Junko and later on other forms of despair, he acts as extremely as he did when met with hope. Not very extreme. I guess this falls under the statement of not being off the rails, which comes off as the writers ridding him of a lot of his character flaws that were beyond him just being a little crazy. The next one I'm covering, being Hajime and Nagito in swimsuits, is interesting. Seems like Hajime brings out all the new pieces of Nagito's character because something feels different here. He's calm in a realistic way. He's pessimistic, and with the context of Hajime's lack of talent, that might be why. I believe he doesn't have anything to praise nor go crazy over, since he's talking to an average person, much like himself as he thinks. It truly feels like a down-to-earth interaction between two normal people, and then the ending hits where he's a little more expressive than he was throughout the rest of the scene. Perhaps there's always going to be a little flavour in his behaviour, or does he still see the hope that sleeps inside Hajime? Is it awakening? Who knows? What a riddle, much like himself. With Mahiru and Shoichi, they discuss the possibility of a ghost being in the photo. Elements of luck, self-loathing, and praising the ultimates are shown here. My favourite part is the good old laughing sprite being put over Nagito, saying that although he didn't have sharp senses, it's impossible that everyone else lacked them as well. On the topic of his time with Leon, it highlights another part of Nagito that proves my previous points. He praises Leon's talent and agrees with his points, till he realises he's talking about his interest in music. This prompts Nagito to convince him otherwise, causing him to explain how talent is the only way he can spread hope. Once again, as I said, he's more passionate about hating despair over loving hope, immediately addressing the problem in a calm and character-fitting way. He doesn't want to put him down, but I guess he still does, socially unaware as always. Though, I feel like the reason Nagito switches up both in his interaction with Kazuichi and turns happy with Hajime is so they can cut the scene short. I mean, they end immediately afterwards, Who knows though, could just be him being himself, as readily as always. Now, I want to discuss something else that I'm not writing in a script or anything. I just thought of it while reading this out. With Nagito, I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but his parents die from a plane crash, and this is all because of a meteor, which kind of proves this cycle of luck, but I want to discuss something else. Some people believe that Nagito believes in the cycle of luck, hope, despair, and everything else because of the trauma of his parents' death and the other circumstances that he went through throughout his childhood. I think this could be why he prioritizes hating despair over loving hope, because he's scared of being hurt again, not because he desires a great hope for everybody else. Though there are things in the game that can contradict this point, I just thought it was interesting and I wanted to mention it. Like, why did he kill himself for hope? Who knows? Nagito and Toko's scene doesn't add much besides peeking into self-hatred and displaying his intellectual ability to diffuse situations over arguing continuously. He also once again praises her talent. In his second interaction with Hajime, including Ryoma this time, he has a clearly optimistic outlook and enjoys a somewhat in-depth discussion. In similar fashion, two people that appreciate beauty, Korekiyo and Nagito, talk about a book. He goes overboard with complimenting both him and the said book, and offers himself as a stepping stone. Perfectly fitting for him in my opinion. He shows the same few values I've touched on previously, going overboard with statements, conversations, and positive emotions. He is offered kindness from Kaito, and argues with Nagisa, but overall quite regular. In the summer festival, he is once again the same, but I like how he reflects on whether or not he was helpful in each interaction. It's interesting and gives a look into something that isn't new nor too repetitive in my opinion. There's also his bonfire stuff, which I don't want to describe too much, but his glancing over his past was entertaining and faithful to his character. In his future scene, I like how Monami points out an important element of Nagito, that being that he has faith in his talent. Although he doesn't think it compares too much, he does see it as reliable when needed, ironically shown best in the scene where Monami is scared of him in Russian roulette. Feels like he shows some confidence here. There's also the scene in chapter 5 where he says, most importantly, he has faith in his ultimate luck. There's also a scene that parallels the Hajime, Ryoma, and Nagito scene, where it replaces Hajime with Izuru, who has the same look on movie theaters, which I found enjoyable. Nagito shows his typical curiosity, and that wraps it up. Anyway, I'm not covering the ultimate talent development plan or other extra content today. Maybe some other time for those people craving Danganronpa content. I want to talk about this game's relationship with the franchise, since I don't want to describe a game's Nagito scenes in detail for no reason, even though I literally just did that with Danganronpa S, but you know, whatever. We're done with it now. We're in the home run, guys, we're almost there. In Danganronpa S, as I've said, Nagito is in a similar set of circumstances as he is in the beginning of Danganronpa 3's Despair arc. It's interesting how he could both act differently and similarly in these situations, so I'd like to cover it here. Let's see what's truly inconsistent in his character once and for all. Is this the true battle of hope against despair? Let's see by analysing things I discovered in the previous chapter. I hope this serves as a somewhat conclusive thing. He's similar in this, though Danganronpa S serves far better in showing Nagito's flaws, such as when he puts Hiro off in his business venture or argues with Kazuichi. Is it that in the games Nagito creeps out the good and bad cast of characters, while in the anime, he's far less morally grey and only creeps out the bad guys such as Junko to serve his more protagonistic-like role more efficiently? It's interesting to think about to me. Obviously, he does creep out his classmates, but it isn't to a very extreme point like it is in the games, which makes sense, they're in a killing game, but you get the point. And a straight up protagonist in Danganronpa S. Another thing is something I've brought up far too many times already. He is still more crazy and energetic in the game, excluding the scene with Mikan and Hajime. I believe this is because, with Mikan, he is attempting to remain more normal as a person, alongside overall being more serious and level-headed, as it is an investigative set of circumstances. This could partially explain his behaviour in the gun scene with him and Junko, but he also acts confident and high and mighty in that scene. With Hajime, it's simple to state that it's because there is no talent surrounding him and that they're only equals in the end. I'm sure Nagito has a perspective similar to that of somebody introducing a friend into their group. They want everybody to get along and would do things to help both sides bond. Nagito does this, although more extreme. The fact I could connect these scenes to things in Danganronpa 3 proves to me that there are connections to be made. Also, with his introduction in Danganronpa 3, he shows confidence and a lack of surprise in his luck, which I think is quite authentic. Nagito does this too, especially in his future scene where he tells Kokichi that something lucky will happen. On top of this, with his behaviour in the summer festival, it gives some context to the problem with episode 4, where he goes to great lengths to help his friends, though the difference is, upon Rantaro saying not to worry about it, he follows through, even though I doubt he knows them extensively. However, when Seiko or anybody else with talent shows distaste in his blowing up of the school, he doesn't refrain from committing to its original idea. Odd how that plays out, huh? I do admit, it could be related to the varying extremity of both situations, but even if it is justified, the exposition and clear attempt at sucking up to Nagito remains clear. Also, his scenes made me realise that Nagito was far more condescending and socially unaware in game. Like, oh my god, he is so out of it compared to his anime counterpart. Honestly, the game version of Nagito makes his anime counterpart appear like a normal person.
But I needed you to believe in yourselves like I do.
In the grand scheme of things. Okay, I want to wrap this up. I think I've covered almost everything. Sorry for slowing down so much towards the end. I ended up wanting to compare every version of Nagito, besides the two that I mentioned earlier, but I hope this is a good watch. I'm still new to this stuff. And remember, I'm going to be covering a lot more things if you guys want me to. I love Nagito even more after writing this, but I'm also kind of sick of talking and thinking about him all the time, and I hope you do too. I also hate the fact Nagito took over my mind while I wrote this, because it took a lot of my brain power doing it. I also worry I'm incorrect in my point in this video, but I love Nagito, and I'm glad I could talk about something I enjoy. There are indisputable differences between anime and game Nagito, whether or not I went a little bit off track. He's more energetic, ballistic, flawed, complex, and antagonistic in the games, while it's different for his anime counterpart. Should I talk about the talent development plan and making friends content for Nagito at some point? Because I will. It could be a great sequel where you'll fall asleep. Besides that though, I want to talk about some more stuff. Like, I'm glad I can make this video. I don't know how long it's going to be at this time of recording, but I'm assuming it's going to be between 40 minutes and an hour, and I hope it's entertaining, and I hope you didn't just skip to the very end to hear my conclusive thoughts. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I do really want to make more of these because it means a lot to me. You know, I used to always watch these types of videos when I was younger, and I still do now. So, if I can make it, kinda, making these videos, I'll be more than happy to do so. Alright, that's all. Thanks for watching, like, thank you so much, like, holy crap. I love Nagito, by the way, did you know that? I love Nagito, he's so great. I love Hope too, like, oh my god.